Hello everybody and welcome to Noob-Splaining. My name is Wolf. This channel is all about bringing the crazy, over-the-top world of Warhammer 40,000 to brand new players who know nothing about it. And also, if you're an experienced player, for starting arguments in the comments, I mean discussions if I'm talking rubbish or not. But it is for all of us to have a laugh. Now, for this video, I'm taking a little break from my current series of combat patrol guides to go through some of the things that have changed that us old school players still refer to, as we're old gits stuck in our ways and don't like change. So pull up a sandbag, hit subscribe, grab a drink and settle in for this week's Noob-Splaining session. I'm not going to lie, this is going to be a little bit different, as I wrote this script as I was coming off the back of a 70-hour working week. So it made perfect sense at the time, but reading back through it today, I realised I was just rambling and talking shite. So instead, I'm throwing most of the script away and I'm going to ad-lib it, which means I'm probably going to end up rambling and talking shite. But basically, I had a subscriber leave a comment a while ago that got me thinking. That comment in particular was from one of the new school players who was specifically looking for the Adeptus Sororitas Combat Patrol Guide, which was one of the first videos in the series I did, and they only found it by browsing through my poster videos. The reason for this, of course, is I'd named it the Sisters of Battle, which has always been their name from their release in 2nd edition. So technically I was wrong, as they're now the Adeptus Sororitas. I mean, this channel is meant to be for newcomers to the game and old school players to join in with, so we can argue the toss with what I say while we welcome the new players, and of course space for everyone to have a laugh. So I suppose me using old school names is not exactly helpful to a new player, but it's now pretty much an ingrained habit. I mean, the Imperial Guard will always be the Imperial Guard to me, rather than the Astra Militarum. The Eldar will always be the Eldar, not the Eldari. So I'm going to have a bit of a chat about what I consider was the flashpoint for these major changes, and what I would say determines whether you're a new school or an old school player. So the whole point of this video is to get discussion going about the difference between old school and new school players. Primarily, I want to build a bridge between us old school miserable gits that are stuck in our ways and the fresh-faced naive twats who know nothing about Games Workshop, I mean the awesome new players, to this wonderful hobby. I suppose the first thing we have to do is determine the difference between an old school and a new school player. And for me, that is the Chapter House incident, or more accurately, the aftermath. Now, for those who aren't aware, back in 2013 there was a small company in America called Chapter House Studios, who were selling official Games Workshop models and also making their own, I suppose you could say, proxy versions of Games Workshop stuff. They were selling combinations of shoulder pad upgrades to even full-blown models. Now, at the time, Games Workshop was primarily run by gamers. You see, back then, pretty much all the Games Workshop head staff were gamers more than soulless capitalist corporate bastards, which we know they are today. Which, being a capitalist bastard is not necessarily a bad thing, especially when the whole point of your company is to make money. Prior to the Chapter House incidents, a lot of units would appear in codexes that Games Workshop hadn't even produced models of, or even artwork. It got so bad at one point, as they were pumping out codexes, they at one point literally created a points table for the orcs to use kids' toys as orc trucks or battle wagons, which at some point led to some absolute genius getting hold of Star Wars 8080 and kit bashing it into an orc walker. Anyway, Games Workshop took Chapter House to court for roughly around 200 different claims of copyright infringement, and like I said, this was before Games Workshop were led by ruthless corporate bastards, and it showed, as Games Workshop got their asses absolutely kicked in court, losing over 2/3 of the claims. For example, the judge ruled that the exact size and shape of a Space Marine shoulder pad can't be copyrighted, but chapter logos on it can. Judge also ruled that Games Workshop can't claim copyright on generic words like Imperial and Guard, or Sisters of Battle. And most importantly, the judge also said that Chapter House absolutely cannot infringe on a model's appearance when Games Workshop has never produced that model, nor have they produced any artwork of it ever. Games Workshop did win a few though, and Chapter House were ordered to pay $25,000 in damages. Now, being just a 3-man band or roundabout, this was enough to bury Chapter House, and also Games Workshop suffered massive legal costs and were on the brink of going down the toilet, because at this point, Fancy Flight Games was stealing a lot of their customers. It was at this point someone realised that having gamers run a gaming company that needs to make a lot of profit probably isn't the best solution, as gamers care more about the game than they do the profits. Let's face it, any company that has stock listed on the markets is here to make profits first and foremost, which is not always a bad thing. Anyway, After the court ruling, the current Games Workshop CEO resigned, totally by choice after a little chat with the Inquisition, and a few other members of staff also left. This resulted in a new CEO, who, like all good CEOs, is a ruthless profit-chasing bastard. I mean, look at Elon Musk. Seems like a nice guy outside of work, but he fired 90% of Twitter's staff, and Twitter is still not only going, it's now become profitable again. So when the new CEO took over Games Workshop, there was about a year of not much, then 6th edition dropped. And that's round about the time that Games Workshop went ballistic. See, 6th edition was the start of the aftermath of the Chapter House incident, and is where I distinguish the difference between new school and old school players. I.e., if you're pre-6th edition, you're old school. If you're 6th edition or onwards, you're new school. Because chances are, if you're 6th edition onwards, you know the armies as things like Drukhari, Adeptus Sororitas, and the Astra Militarum, not Dark Eldar, Sisters of Battle, and Imperial Guard. Now, the Imperial Guard and Sisters of Battle did have their names changed because of the Chapter House incident. Interestingly enough, the Eldar didn't. It was round about the same time that Games Workshop also secured a rather lucrative license from the Tolkien estate to produce the Lord of the Rings game. And seeing as Tolkien's workings had already mentioned the fact that an Eldar is an ancient elf of high ranking or high power, Games Workshop couldn't really copyright the name Eldar without shitting on the doorstep of Tolkien and biting the hand that's feeding it, especially with the new license they got. So the Eldari name change came about because of that license, not the Chapter House incident. So one of the first things the new CEO implemented was that if we don't have a model for it, it's not going in a codex, which is why a lot of people felt the 6th edition codexes were somewhat light in unit choices, because Games Workshop were currently scrabbling around like crazy in the background trying to produce miniatures for stuff they'd never produced before, and hadn't done for the last 5 editions. On top of that, they changed their whole recruitment philosophy to hiring the best person for the job, whether they're into the hobby or not, and that mentality still exists to this day, in the fact that around 50% of the head office staff aren't into the hobby at all. To them, it's just a job. I know that, as I actually had an interview up at head office for a sales job, but apparently I was too salesy for them. I'll tell that story another time. But for me, it's the 6th edition is what separates us, because everyone prior to 6th edition still calls them Eldar and Sisters of Battle. A couple other things that I want to talk about as well. Us old school players sometimes tend to refer to the original legions that are now chapters as still a legion. For example, the Blood Angels, still a legion. Imperial Fists, still a legion. Space Wolves, well, technically they never stopped being a legion, but that's the Space Wolves for you. And again, when the Space Marines legions were broken down into chapters, some of those chapters stayed pretty close to the apple tree. Some humped the apple tree really hard, whereas some got a passport and fucked right off the reservation. Black Templars and Multi-Factors, I'm looking at you. Now also, back in the day, there was pretty much only 3 distinct unit types. This was quite easy to spot in the Space Marines because they called them that exactly, which was Tactical, Assault and Devastator. Later versions expanded this into Fast Attack, Heavy Support, Elite, etc. But for the basic units, it was those 3, and that classification can be passed on to pretty much any of the armies. Put it simply, Tactical are the line infantry, Assault are your melee specialists, and the Devastators have the big guns. So, for example, in an Eldari army, or Eldar, the Tacticals were the Dire Avengers, the Assault were the Banshees, and the Devastators are the Dark Reapers and Fire Dragons. Those classifications don't really exist anymore, since Marines went from Astartes to Primaris, and also the whole way you build an army has changed massively, resulting in most tactical units from all armies being sidelined and gathering dust. Now this is something else I want to touch on as well. The only reason the keyword battle line exists in 10th, in my opinion, is so the old Swarm players from 2nd to 9th edition still have an army to play with, while they slowly realise and replace the 50% of their army that is shit. Specifically I'm talking about Guardsmen and Orc Boys. There are way better units in both codexes, so why would you take them anymore? And something else as well was the Dreadnought class vehicle. Every faction had a Dreadnought. Over time they had their names changed. The Eldar Dreadnought became the Wraith Lord. The Orc Dreadnought became the Death Dread. It's really now only the Space Marines that still have Dreadnoughts. Even the Tau have Dreadnoughts in the form of some of the big crisis suits. But the only faction that doesn't have a Dreadnought actually is the Drukhari, but that suits them. And yes, the Harlequins used to have a Dreadnought. Anyway, I think I've rambled on enough there. But basically, do you agree? Is my distinction of old school and new school players at the 6th edition point when Games Workshop were reeling from the aftermath of the Chapter House incident, and that's when they declared, if there's no model, it's not going in the codex. Because to me as well, it was round about this period of time that prior to that, the Dark Angels, Blood Angels and Space Wolves were constantly vying for the top dog position within the Space Marines. Space Hulk came out and it was the Blood Angels who were the most popular. Then the Deathwing expansion came out and suddenly the Dark Angels are at the top. Then we had the Space Wolves Codex came out and suddenly they were the most popular. Then the Angels of Death Codex came out and so it was back to the Blood Angels and the Dark Angels, and this went backwards and forwards through 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th editions, with each of those chapters getting a codex every edition, including after that as well. But it was around about 6th when the Ultramarines started getting pushed everywhere. The reason for this obviously is the Ultramarines are a nice safe pair of hands to introduce to mum and dad's wallet. Again, let me know if you agree with that or not. The only reason the Ultramarines are the poster boys is because they're a nice safe pair of hands. Anyway, this was supposedly a chat about old school versus new school and has somehow digressed into a history lesson and me talking shite like I said I would. So let me know in the comments if you think there's anything I missed or if there's anything you agree with. Do you think the new school and old school point is at a different point of time? Do you think the aftermath of Chapter House is what formed Games Workshop into the behemoth it is today? You know, as always, let me know your thoughts. Let's get a discussion going in the comments. And let's see if between us we can figure out the exact point, or as close to it as we can, that divides new school and old school players. Let me know what you agree with, what you disagree with, or if there's anything I've missed, because I get this horrible feeling there's so much more I should have spoke about, but it just didn't seem the right time to fit it in, so perhaps this is a subject we might have to cover again later down the line. But in the meantime, if you got this far, thank you. As always, I love the fact that you got this far. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button. Make sure you leave a comment. Let's get this discussion going. And as always, make sure you share this video with someone who you think could do with some noob-splaining in their life. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next video. Take care, folks.